Good evening, dear listeners, and a very warm welcome to you all. Wherever you're tuning in from tonight, maybe cozied up in bed, listening from your favorite quiet corner at home, or perhaps relaxing somewhere peaceful with the world fading away outside. I'm so glad you've joined me here. Take a slow, deep breath. Let your shoulders drop. Maybe pull the covers up a bit higher and feel the day gently slip away. Let the story begin. The Galapagos Expedition, Death, Hercule Poirot, Darwin Island Mystery. The Galapagos Islands, Darwin's own theater of evolution, became the stage for her deadly performance. Exotic, remote, every explorer playing their role in scientific discovery. Then Dr. Elias Thorne was found dead on the sun-baked rocks of Darwin Island, his body twisted unnaturally, a vial of poison clutched in his rigid hand. Police saw suicide, a man overwhelmed by failure. But Hercule Poirot saw a performance. Someone in this expedition of intellect and ambition was playing a role. The role of explorer, the role of innocent, the role of murderer. The curtain rises. Chapter 1. The stage is set. The luxury yacht. Evolution's grace sliced through the Pacific like polished silver, its Art Deco curves catching the fierce equatorial sun. Polished mahogany gleamed on every surface. Crystal chandeliers tinkled gently with each roll of the sea. Salt air mixed with the sweet, heavy perfume of frangipani flowers brought from the mainland, while seabirds cried overhead, wild notes against the ship's refined silence. Hercule Poirot stood on deck, small hands on the brass rail, adjusting his magnificent moustache with precision. Mon ami, he said softly to Captain Hastings beside him. This floating palace is no mere transport. It is a stage. The islands wait ahead. Darwin's laboratory. But here, already, the actors gather for a more dangerous drama. Dr. Elias Thorne, the expedition's leader, had assembled his cast with care. A biologist in his 50s, silver-haired and intense, he burned with zeal for evolutionary secrets. His wife, Lady Victoria Thorne, moved through the salon in silk gowns that rustled like secrets, her Chanel perfume trailing behind her. She played devoted spouse perfectly. Yet Poirot noticed her eyes lingering too long on the young assistant, Marcus Hale. Hale, 30s, ambitious, wore rough tweed that clashed with the yacht's elegance. His sandalwood cologne blended with furniture wax as he hovered near Thorne, always attentive and always watching. Professor Lydia Voss, sharp-featured rival academic, wore crisp linen blouses and carried constant tension, as though waiting for Thorne to stumble. Miss Elena Ruiz, the wealthy heiress who funded everything, added glamour, velvet gloves, hothouse rose corsage. Yet her laughter sounded rehearsed, too bright. Captain Reginald Beaumont commanded the vessel in starched uniform, leather boots creaking on parquet, exuding calm authority in this confined sea theater. As the yacht dropped anchor off Darwin Island, the party went ashore. Night air chilled at first, then warmed beside the bonfire on black lava rocks. Flames crackled, throwing shadows that danced like spotlit performers. Wood smoke curled upward, mingling with the bitter taste of strong continental coffee poured into crystal cups. Thorne lectured passionately. Evolution is the greatest performance, survival the only role that matters. His voice carried over the waves. Later, he slipped away to collect specimens alone. Hours passed. Then came Lady Victoria's scream, high, theatrical, cutting the night. They found Thorne sprawled on jagged rocks, face locked in agony, an empty cyanide vial, his own from the ship's laboratory, gripped in stiff fingers. The mainland police arrived at dawn by seaplane and called it suicide. Thorne, they said, had grown despondent over a disproven theory. Poirot tilted his egg-shaped head. Mais non. This death is no private tragedy. It is staged. The poison placed too neatly. The pose too dramatic. This is performance, mon ami, not despair. Observe carefully. This expedition plays scientific passion too eagerly. Masks already in place. Poirot directs the light. You watch with me, no? See how Lady Victoria's tears appear exactly on cue. The tension builds. Someone's lines will falter soon. Poirot gathered them in the yacht's salon, velvet curtains drawn against pattering rain. The air held Lily's sweetness, cigar smoke from Beaumont's Cuban, and the faint scent of champagne lingering on glasses. He studied Lady Victoria first. She weeps, yes. Handkerchief dabs. Shoulders tremble on rhythm. But the cloth stays dry. No mascara streaks. Grief performed with perfect technique. Too perfect. Therefore she knew of the death sooner than admitted. Her sorrow is costume, not heart. You begin to see it, non? The theatre already cracks. The others showed shock in their ways. Hale's hands shook slightly, pouring icy champagne. Voss adjusted glasses with cold marble calm. Ruiz twisted kid gloves. Beaumont's boots echoed heavy steps. Poirot smoothed an imaginary wrinkle from his sleeve, green eyes gleaming. The little grey cells feel the rehearsal. This vial, a prop, not accident. Ask yourself, why does Hale refuse to meet Voss's gaze? The spotlight of truth begins to warm. Night deepened. The grandfather clock chimed 12, solemn as a director's cue. Poirot retired to his cabin, crisp linen cool against skin, mind turning. Every actor here hides a secret. Hercule Poirot sees behind the masks. The stage was set. The players had taken their places. Let the drama begin. Chapter 2. Enter the players. The morning after the discovery, the Evolution's Grace lay at anchor like a silent theatre waiting for the next act. Sunlight streamed through the salon portholes, warming the polished mahogany and making the crystal chandelier sparkle with tiny nervous flashes. The air carried the faint sweetness of a wilting hothouse lilies, mixed with the lingering bite of strong continental coffee and the smoky trace of Beaumont's Cuban cigar from the night before. Hercule Poirot, immaculate in his dark suit, arranged the suspects around the long table as though positioning actors for a crucial scene. Velvet cushions sighed softly under their weight. He made a small expressive gesture with his hands. Mesdames et messieurs, he began, tilting his egg-shaped head. The curtain has risen on tragedy. Now each of you will perform a private scene for Poirot. We seek truth. Truth does not rehearse. Lies. Lies flow with terrible smoothness. Let us begin. Lady Victoria Thorne took the first mark, and she sat with perfect posture, silk scarf draped elegantly. Chanel perfume rising in gentle waves whenever she moved. She played the grieving widow with practiced restraint. Voice low, eyes glistening just enough. Fingers twisting a crisp linen handkerchief. She described the last evening, how Elias had seemed distant but not despairing, how he spoke often of legacy and failure lately. He went to collect night specimens alone, she said. I retired to my cabin with hot coffee. I heard nothing until the scream. Her alibi was neat, solitary, unchallenged so far. Yet Poirot noted the handkerchief never quite touched real tears. The performance was technically flawless. Next game, Marcus Hale. The young assistant sat forward, rough tweed jacket creased, sandalwood cologne sharp against the room's floral sweetness. He played loyal disciple admirably, voice earnest, hands gesturing to emphasize Thorne's genius. We argued the day before, yes, about research credit. But it was nothing serious. He was excited, triumphant even. Hale claimed he had been alone in the ship's small laboratory after dinner, cataloging samples until late. His fingers drummed once, twice, on the smooth table edge. A tiny, unconscious rhythm. Poirot's green eyes gleamed. A tell, perhaps. Professor Lydia Voss entered the scene next. Crisp linen blouse buttoned to the throat, glasses catching the light like tiny spotlights. She performed cool professionalism. Thorne was a rival, certainly. Brilliant, but arrogant. We disagreed on methodology. She stated she had remained on the open deck under an awning, making notes while rain began to fall, either drops tapping steadily on canvas overhead. Her alibi depended on no one seeing her, which, conveniently, no one had. Her voice never wavered, but when Hale's name was mentioned, her lips pressed into the thinnest line. Miss Eleanor Ruiz brought soft glamour to her turn. Hothouse rose still pinned to her dress, velvet gloves folded in her lap. She spoke in a low, musical voice. I funded this voyage for the adventure and to support Elias's work. She admitted Thorne had asked her for more money recently. Large sums he called investments in the future. She claimed to have spent the evening alone on the sheltered terrace, wrapped in a shawl against the chill night air, sipping dry champagne and listening to distant piano music drifting from the salon. Her kid gloves never stopped moving, smoothing themselves over and over. Finally, Captain Reginald Beaumont. Starched uniform impeccable, leather boots polished to a mirror shine. He stood rather than sat, every inch the steadfast commander. I was on the bridge most of the evening, he said firmly, checking charts, watching the weather. He confirmed the cyanide vial belonged to the ship's scientific stores. Thorne held one of only 2 keys. Beaumont's own key never left his possession, he insisted. His deep voice carried no tremor, yet when Poirot asked if he had seen anyone near the laboratory hatch, his gaze flicked, for the briefest second, toward Lady Victoria. Poirot touched his magnificent moustache thoughtfully. Merci. Each performance, interesting. Now observe with Poirot, mon ami. He turned slightly toward an invisible audience. You see how Lady Victoria plays sorrow with such control. No mascara runs, no handkerchief truly wet, too perfect. Truth stumbles, does it not? Lies are rehearsed until seamless. He moved among them like a director adjusting lighting. And you, Mr. Hale, your hands speak when your mouth is silent. That small, drumming anxiety or guilt remembering its lines? Hale flushed. Voss adjusted her glasses with deliberate calm. Ruiz's rose trembled slightly in the warm air from the open porthole. The alibis, Poirot continued softly. They overlap in curious places. The laboratory hatch was unlocked for a time no one claims. Footsteps were heard, soft but present, on the parquet corridor. Someone walked where they should not have walked. He smoothed an imaginary wrinkle from his sleeve. Consider the psychology, mes amis. What role does each of you need to play here? The devoted wife, and the loyal assistant, the detached scholar, the generous patron, the honorable captain. Ask yourself, if you carried guilt, how would you perform innocence? The room grew still. Rain tapped insistently on the glass. The grandfather clock in the corner chimed the half-hour, solemn and slow. Somewhere below, deck's door closed softly, the sound traveling through the yacht like a whispered cue. Poirot drew himself up, still small, yet commanding the stage. Every actor has taken their mark. The spotlight warms. But who plays truth and who plays lies? The players had entered. But who performed truth and who performed lies? Chapter 3. The First Act. The sun beat down mercilessly on Darwin Island as the group returned to the crime scene under Poirot's direction. Black lava rocks radiated heat. The air shimmered and carried the sharp salt tang of the sea, mixed with the faint, decaying sweetness of frangipani still clinging to clothing brought from the yacht. Footsteps crunched unevenly over the rough terrain, a harsh contrast to the yacht's smooth parquet. Waves broke steadily below the cliffs, providing a constant, rhythmic underscore to the unfolding drama. Poirot walked ahead, small and precise, his green eyes scanning every detail like a director studying blocking. "Observe, mon ami," he murmured to Hastings, tilting his egg-shaped head. "This island is nature's raw stage. No curtains, no props prepared. Yet our actors still carry their masks here. Let us see whose performance cracks first under the true spotlight." The body had been covered with a tarpaulin, but Poirot lifted one corner briefly. Thorne's face remained frozen in a rictus of surprise, rather than the slackness of despair one might expect from deliberate suicide. The cyanide vial rested too neatly in the curled fingers, almost placed for dramatic effect. Poirot noted the absence of struggle marks on the surrounding rocks. No frantic scraping, no displaced stones. "Too composed," he said softly. "Death by one's own hand is rarely so artistic." Lady Victoria hovered nearby, silk scarf fluttering in the hot breeze, performing anxious concern. She dabbed at dry eyes again with the same lace handkerchief. When Poirot asked once more about Thorne's recent mood, she insisted he had spoken of failure and the end of everything. Yet her hands clenched the handkerchief too tightly, knuckles white against the delicate lace. A small tell. Poirot filed it away. Marcus Hale knelt to demonstrate how he had helped collect samples the previous afternoon. His rough tweed jacket snagged on jagged lava. He swore under his breath. He admitted handling the cyanide for preserving specimens, but swore the vial had been locked away afterward. Professor Voss watched him with narrowed eyes, then spoke sharply. "Thorne and I fought over methodology for years. He accused me of stealing ideas once, but murder, ridiculous." Her crisp linen blouse was already damp with sweat, yet her voice stayed level, too level. Miss Elena Ruiz stood a little apart, velvet gloves inappropriate for the terrain, yet still worn, as though costume were essential even here. She confessed quietly that Thorne had pressed her for more funds, large, urgent sums. "He said it was for the future of science," she murmured. But her rose corsage had wilted completely in the heat, petals dropping like discarded lines. Captain Beaumont pointed out the path Thorne must have taken. His leather boots left clear prints in softer ash, unlike the confusing scuff marks near the body. Poirot gathered small items from the scene: the vial, a torn scrap of notepaper reading only "Evolution Ends," a single kid glove not belonging to Ruiz. He arranged them symmetrically on a flat rock. "The little gray cells begin to see pattern," he said. "Alibis shift when pressed." The laboratory hatch was unlocked between 10 and 11, yet no one claims that hour. Footsteps were heard. Someone walked where they should not. "Watch carefully, mon ami." You become the careful observer now, non? See how Voss's gaze darts to Hoyle when his name is spoken. The mask slips. just a fraction. And did you catch it? Ask yourself, why does Lady Victoria grip that handkerchief as though it might betray her? Too perfect, too rehearsed. Truth stumbles, lies flow smooth. The tension rises. Someone will forget their lines soon. Poirot turned his director method on Professor Voss. She defends her position, yes. Posture rigid, words clipped and certain. Denial of any collaboration, with Hale emphatic. But observe. The quick glance toward him, the slight compression of lips. The performance of pure enmity is overplayed. Too much force behind the words. I am reminded of the Orient Express affair, where an entire carriage of strangers performed disconnection so convincingly. Eyes averted on cue, conversations timed to avoid depth, even breathing carefully controlled to suggest indifference. Yet one tiny slip betrayed them. A woman's hand lingered too long near a man's sleeve when no one was supposed to notice. The body reveals alliance even when the mouth swears hatred. Genuine rivals keep cold distance. Performed hatred often seeks secret confirmation. Psychology teaches us this. True emotion repels. False emotion clings. Therefore, Voss and Hale are linked by more than rivalry. Their public dislike is theatre. You see it now, no? The first mask cracks. The sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the rocks. A sudden gust carried the distant cry of a seabird and the faint wood smoke scent of last night's bonfire. Poirot straightened, smoothing an imaginary wrinkle from his sleeve. The first act draws to its close. Contradictions multiply like missed cues. Greed performs as scientific passion, and jealousy wears the mask of scholarly detachment. But the stage grows warm. Masks cannot endure the spotlight forever. In reflection, Poirot considered the deeper theatre at work. On this island, where nature reveals its truths without apology, humans still hide behind roles because exposure terrifies more than any cliff edge. Why do we wear masks? Fear of judgment, yes, but also pride. The ego demands that it be seen as strong, clever, virtuous, even in darkness. I recall the case of Roger Ackroyd, where a man performed shock and grief with mirror-rehearsed precision. Widened eyes, trembling lip, even the catch in the throat timed perfectly. Yet his hand reached for a cigarette case with unnatural steadiness. A truly shattered man fumbles. Performance polishes every gesture. There, as here, the body spoke what the face denied. Genuine emotion disrupts. Rehearsed emotion controls. Universally, deception fails because the soul grows weary of pretending. The heart beats too fast. The breath catches. The eyes betray. Theatrical wisdom, mon ami. Watch always the unguarded instant. The pause, the glance, the hand that forgets its role. In that moment, truth peeps through. The group trudged back toward the waiting launch, footsteps heavy now. The first act concluded. Some masks had cracked. Chapter 4. Rehearsed Lines. The afternoon sun slanted low across the deck of the Evolution's Grace, turning the polished mahogany railings golden and warming the velvet curtains that framed the open salon doors. The air carried the heavy sweetness of hothouse lilies beginning to fade, to mingle now with the sharp bite of cigar smoke drifting from Captain Beaumont's position near the wheelhouse. Crystal glasses from lunch still sat on the table, their rims bearing the faint taste of dry champagne. Hercule Poirot stood at the head of the gathered group, like a director calling for a second rehearsal, his small hands making precise, expressive gestures. Mes amis, he said softly, tilting his egg-shaped head. The first act has shown us cracks. Now we test the scripts. Alibis are lines actors speak, but lines can falter when pressure is applied. Truth requires no rehearsal. Lies, they must be practiced again and again. Let us see whose performance begins to strain. He turned first to Lady Victoria Thorne. She sat with regal composure, silk scarf draped elegantly, Chanel perfume rising whenever she shifted. Poirot asked her once more about the hour between 10 and 11, the hour when soft footsteps had been heard near the laboratory hatch. I was in my cabin the entire time, she repeated, voice steady, sipping coffee, reading. But a steward, summoned quietly by Poirot earlier, had recalled hearing her silk gown rustle along the corridor at precisely 10:15. The color drained slightly from her cheeks. The crisp linen handkerchief in her lap twisted once, then stilled. A short walk. For air, she amended quickly. Too quickly. Poirot moved to Marcus Hale next. The assistant's rough tweed jacket seemed to chafe him in the warm air. Beads of sweat appeared at his temples. You say you were in the laboratory until 11, Poirot reminded him. Yet Professor Voss saw a figure, your height, your build, near the beach bath at 10:30. Hale's hand went instinctively to his pocket, where he kept a small flask of what he called bitter medicine for nerves. She must be mistaken, he said, but his voice cracked on the last word. The flask rattled faintly as he withdrew his hand. Poirot's green eyes gleamed. A tell. Professor Lydia Voss maintained her crisp linen poise longest. I have no reason to lie about my movements, she declared. But when Poirot produced a folded note found tucked inside a book in her cabin, a note in Thorne's handwriting discussing our arrangement regarding the Darwin paper, her glasses slipped slightly down her nose. She pushed them up with a trembling finger. That was professional correspondence, nothing more. Yet the paper bore a date after their supposed final quarrel. The performance of pure scholarly rivalry began to buckle. Miss Elena Ruiz sat with her velvet gloves folded tightly, the wilted rose corsage now removed. Poirot spoke gently but firmly. You told us Thorne asked for funds, but letters in your cabin reveal he threatened to expose a family scandal unless you paid. Her kid gloves creaked as her hands clenched. He was desperate, she whispered. I refused. But her eyes filled, real tears this time, not the controlled glisten of before. The mask of the generous, carefree patron slipped, revealing something raw beneath. Captain Beaumont stood apart, leather boots planted firmly. I unlocked the laboratory only for routine checks, he insisted. Poirot produced a small brass key found near the body, Beaumont's spare, missing from his ring since the previous evening. You gave it to someone, Poirot said quietly. Beaumont's jaw tightened. The cigar between his fingers trembled. I lent it briefly to Lady Victoria. She said she needed something from the stores. The admission hung in the warm air like smoke. Poirot paced slowly before them, smoothing an imaginary wrinkle from his sleeve. Observe with Poirot, mon ami. You see how the rehearsed lines begin to stumble? Lady Victoria's short walk arrives late. Hale's flask rattles when challenged. Voss's professional correspondence is dated too conveniently. Ruiz's tears are genuine at last. Beaumont's key betrays loyalty misplaced. He touched his magnificent moustache thoughtfully. The psychology is clear. Guilt performs as helpfulness, as confidence, as indifference. But the body forgets its role under pressure. Hands shake, voices crack, and eyes dart. Truth needs no rehearsal. Watch this carefully. The mask slips. Did you catch Beaumont's trembling cigar? Consider the psychology. What role does each need to protect so desperately? Too perfect before, too strained now. Truth stumbles. Lies flow less smooth. The tension rises. Someone will break character entirely soon. The sun dipped behind a cloud. A sudden chill swept across the deck. Rain began again, tapping insistently on the awnings like impatient applause. Somewhere below, the grandfather clock chimed 4. Doors closed softly as crew members moved about their duties, unaware of the drama unfolding above. Poirot drew himself up, small but commanding. Rehearsed lines falter when the audience watches too closely. This vial was no suicide prop. It was placed with care. This note was planted. These alibis were written. Shaw not lived. He made one final expressive gesture. The script is failing. The actors feel it. Soon the curtain will reveal who wrote the tragedy. The group remained silent, each face a study in strain. The air thickened with fading perfume, dying flowers, and the acrid edge of fear. Rehearsed lines began to falter. Truth needed no rehearsal. Chapter 5. The Mask Slips. Evening fell over the Evolution's grace with tropical suddenness. The salon became a tightly lit stage, crystal chandelier glowing softly overhead, velvet curtains drawn against the pattering rain on the windows, fire crackling in the hearth to push back the chill seeping from the deck. The air was thick with dying lilies, fading Chanel perfume, the bitter edge of strong coffee left cooling in cups, and the faint, acrid trace of Beaumont's last cigar. Though Hercule Poirot stood at the center, small but commanding, his green eyes gleaming like spotlights in the dim room. Mesdames et messieurs, he announced quietly, making an expressive gesture with his small hands. The performances have grown strained. Lines falter, alibis crack. Tonight, one mask will fall completely. The spotlight of truth grows hot. Who among you will step forward or be pushed? He began with Marcus Hale. The young assistant sat rigid, rough tweed jacket creased and damp from nervous sweat. Poirot placed the small flask on the polished mahogany table between them. You call this bitter medicine for nerves. Yet analysis shows traces of cyanide. Not enough to kill, but enough to flavor a larger dose. Thorne discovered your theft of his research notes, did he not? He threatened to expose you, to cut you from the will, to end your career before it began. Hale's hand shot toward the flask instinctively, then froze. That's impossible, he stammered. His voice cracked on the second syllable. Poirot leaned closer. You performed loyalty so well, hovering, assisting, praising. But ambition performed as devotion. When Thorne confronted you on the beach that night, you offered him a drink from this very flask, a final toast to future discoveries. He drank. You waited. Then you arranged the body, placed the empty vial from the lab, planted the note. Magnifique theater, except for one detail. Your hands were steady when you claimed they shook with grief. A guilty man remembers to tremble. An innocent one forgets. Hale's face crumpled. He buried his head in his hands. Real sobs shook his shoulders. No dry handkerchief this time. In the mask of the loyal assistant, shattered completely. Poirot turned next to Lady Victoria. She rose halfway, silk gown rustling, then sank back. You knew, Poirot said gently. Not the murder itself, perhaps, but the plan. Beaumont gave you his spare key. You walked to the laboratory at 10:15. You removed nothing, but you left the hatch unlocked for Hale. Loyalty to a lover performed as wifely duty, but love cannot hide murder forever. Victoria's composure broke. Tears, Genuine mascara streaked, spilled down her cheeks. I didn't want Elias dead, she whispered. I only wanted freedom. Her voice dissolved into quiet weeping. The perfect widow's performance lay in ruins. Professor Voss watched in stunned silence, glasses fogged from the warm fire. Poirot addressed her last. You forged no alliance with Hale for murder, but you did for credit. The note in your cabin proves it. You hated Thorne, yet you envied him. Envy performed as scholarly rivalry. When the truth emerged, you tried to shift blame to Ruiz. Voss removed her glasses with shaking hands. I collaborated once. That was all. Her voice was small, stripped of its crisp edge. No more performance of cool detachment. Miss Eleanor Ruiz clutched her velvet gloves until the kid leather creaked. Poirot spoke softly. Your obsession with Thorne masked itself as patronage. When he rejected you, finally, cruelly, you confessed your love. He laughed. You retreated to the terrace, drank champagne, wept alone. But you knew Hale's plan. You said nothing. Jealousy performed as indifference. Ruiz's head bowed. Real tears fell onto her gloves. Nay, I hated him by the end, she admitted. But I never wished him dead. The heiress's glamorous mask dissolved into quiet human regret. Captain Beaumont stood last, leather boots rooted to the parquet. I gave her the key, he said hoarsely before Poirot could speak. I thought she needed something from the stores, nothing more. When I learned, his broad shoulders sagged. The steadfast commander's role collapsed into simple, ashamed loyalty, misplaced. Poirot stepped back, surveying the broken cast. Observe, mon ami, he murmured. You watch with Poirot, no? See how the masts fall one by one. Hale's steady hands betrayed ambition. Victoria's dry handkerchief hid complicity. Voss's glance revealed secret alliance. Ruiz's tears exposed obsession. Beaumont's cigar trembled when duty cracked. The body always forgets its lines when truth burns too close. You see it now, don't you? If you carried guilt, how would you try to perform innocence? Would your hands shake? Would your eyes dart? Would your voice hold steady? The spotlight reveals what rehearsal cannot hide. Bravo to them all. But the performance was never convincing. The fire snapped loudly. Rain drummed harder on the windows. The grandfather clock chimed 9, slow and solemn. Poirot touched his magnificent moustache thoughtfully, then smoothed an imaginary wrinkle from his sleeve. The mask had fallen, he said quietly. Beneath it, the true face at last. Chapter 6. Behind the curtain. The rain had eased to a soft patter by the time Poirot led the weary cast into the yacht's small library. Mahogany bookshelves lined the walls, and their leather-bound volumes exhaling a faint, musty scent that mingled with the dying sweetness of lilies and the lingering bitterness of cold coffee left in forgotten cups. A single reading lamp cast a warm, focused pool of light over the central table. Beyond it, shadows gathered like discarded costumes. The fire in the corner grate crackled gently, pushing back the chill that seeped through the portholes. Velvet curtains muffled the sound of waves against the hull. Hercule Poirot arranged a few key items symmetrically on the polished surface. Thorne's torn note, Beaumont's spare key, Hale's incriminating flask, the folded letter from Victoria's cabin, the scrap of paper found near the body. Mes amis, he began quietly, tilting his egg-shaped head. The masks have cracked. Now we step behind the curtain, and the stage is empty of performance. Only the truth remains backstage. Hidden connections, secret motives, the real relationships that drove this tragedy. Let us pull the drapes aside, He started with the affair. Lady Victoria sat pale and silent, silk scarf limp in her lap. Poirot placed Beaumont's spare key before her. You asked for it the evening before last. You said you needed a bottle of rare medicine from the stores. But you did not take medicine. You took nothing, except the opportunity to leave the laboratory hatch unlocked. Beaumont, standing near the fire, stared at the floor. His leather boots shifted once, the creak loud in the quiet room. I believed her, he said hoarsely. I loved her. I thought it harmless. The steadfast captain's mask of duty had hidden a deeper, more dangerous loyalty. Poirot turned to Marcus Hale. You, Thorne, discovered your theft of his research. Pages of notes, copied word for word, passed to a rival journal under your name. He confronted you on the beach that final night. He told you he would disinherit you from the Expedition Trust and expose the plagiarism publicly. You offered him a drink from your flask. To calm our nerves, you said. The cyanide was already inside. After he collapsed, you arranged the body, placed the empty lab vial, planted the suicide note you had forged in his hand. Ambition performed as devotion, until the curtain threatened to fall. Hale's shoulders slumped further. No more pretense of the eager assistant. Real exhaustion lined his face. Professor Voss removed her glasses and rubbed her eyes. Poirot laid the dated note before her. You and Thorne were not only rivals, you collaborated in secret on the Darwin paper. He took the credit. You accepted it for the funding it brought. When he began to claim sole authorship, you grew bitter. You did not kill him, but you knew of Hale's desperation. You said nothing, perhaps hoping the scandal would ruin them both and leave the field clear for you. Voss nodded once, a small defeated motion. I envied his spotlight. That was my sin. Miss Elena Ruiz sat last, velvet gloves discarded on the table, hands bare and trembling. Poirot spoke gently. Thorne rejected your love, cruelly, publicly, in a letter you burned, but not completely. The ashes were found in your cabin grate. You funded the expedition to stay near him, hoping he would see your devotion. When he laughed at your confession, something broke. You retreated to the terrace with champagne, but you heard Hale's plan discussed in whispers days earlier. You remained silent. Obsession performed as generous patronage until rejection tore the mask away. Ruiz whispered, I wanted him to need me. Instead, he needed no one. Poirot stepped back, surveying the revealed backstage. Every secret a motive, greed behind ambition, love twisted into complicity, hate masked as scholarly detachment, jealousy dressed as indifference. The psychology is simple, yet profound. Humans hide because exposure feels like death, but secrets fester. They push the actor toward the very act they fear. Watch carefully, mon ami. You see how the curtain parts. Voss's glance at Hale now makes sense. Complicity, not hatred. Beaumont's cigar no longer steadies his hand, and Victoria's dry handkerchief hid more than grief. Consider the psychology. What role does each cling to so desperately that they would protect murder itself? The tension has broken. The true faces emerge. The fire snapped, sending sparks up the chimney. Rain tapped lightly on the glass. Somewhere distant, the grandfather clock chimed 10, slow and final. Poirot arranged the last clue, a single fallen rose petal from Ruiz's corsage, beside the others with precision. Behind every curtain, a secret, he said softly. Behind every secret, a motive. The stage is bare now. Only truth remains to take its bow. Chapter 7. The Final Act. The Salon of the Evolution's Grace had become a theatre in miniature. Velvet curtains were drawn tight against the black night sea. The crystal chandelier cast soft, focused pools of light like spotlights on the assembled cast. The fire crackled steadily in the hearth, its warmth battling the chill that seeped through the portholes. Scents lingered in the heavy air, fading lilies, the ghost of Chanel perfume, bitter coffee dregs, the faint, acrid trace of a long-extinguished Cuban cigar. Hercule Poirot stood at the center, small yet commanding, his green eyes gleaming with quiet satisfaction. He made one slow, expressive gesture with his small hands, as though raising an invisible baton. Mesdames et messieurs, he began in a calm, measured voice. The curtain rises for the final act. You have each performed for Hercule Poirot, some with truth, most with desperate artifice. Now the masks must fall. Let us review the performances, one by one, as any good director would do, before the house lights come up. He turned first to Lady Victoria Thorne. She sat rigid, silk gown catching the firelight, hands folded too tightly in her lap. Lady Victoria, you played the grieving widow with exquisite control. The dry handkerchief, the steady voice, the perfectly timed tears that never quite fell. But the performance was too perfect. A steward heard your footsteps near the laboratory hatch at 10:15. You asked Beaumont for his spare key, not for medicine, but to leave the door unlocked for another. Complicity performed as wifely devotion. The mask of sorrow hid knowledge of murder. Victoria's shoulders sagged. A single genuine tear escaped at last. Poirot moved to Marcus Hale. The young man sat hunched, rough tweed jacket crumpled, hands clasped so tightly the knuckles showed white. Mr. Hale, you gave the most convincing performance of all, the loyal, grieving assistant. Shock, outrage, helpful cooperation. Magnifique. You hovered, you praised, you wept on cue, but ambition performed as loyalty. Thorne discovered your plagiarism. Notes stolen, credit claimed in secret. He confronted you on the beach. You offered him a drink from your flask. Bitter medicine, you called it. Cyanide was already inside. After he collapsed, you arranged the body with theatrical care. The vial placed just so. The forged suicide note slipped into his hand. One small error. When you claimed your hands shook with grief, they did not. A guilty man remembers to tremble. An innocent one forgets. Your steady hands betrayed you. Hale buried his face in his hands. A low, broken sound escaped him. Poirot turned to Professor Lydia Voss, and she sat very straight, glasses reflecting the chandelier light. Professor Voss, you played the bitter rival with scholarly precision, cold words, narrowed eyes, righteous indignation. Yet you collaborated with Thorne in secret on the Darwin paper. When he claimed sole credit, envy performed as detachment. You knew of Hale's desperation. You said nothing, hoping scandal would clear your path. Envy masked as intellectual disdain. Voss removed her glasses slowly, eyes suddenly tired and ordinary. Poirot addressed Miss Elena Ruiz next. She sat with bare hands now, velvet gloves discarded beside her like shed skin. Miss Ruiz, you performed the generous patron, adventure, funding, benevolence. But obsession performed as indifference. Thorne rejected your love cruelly. You heard whispers of Hale's plan days earlier. You remained silent on the terrace with your champagne, letting jealousy wear the mask of generosity. Ruiz bowed her head. Quiet tears fell onto the polished table. Finally, Captain Reginald Beaumont. He stood near the fire, leather boots planted, starched uniform, no longer quite so impeccable. Captain Beaumont, you portrayed the honorable commander, duty, loyalty, calm authority. Yet duty does not include handing over a key to cover an affair. You gave it to Lady Victoria, believing her lie about medicine. When murder followed, you protected her silence. Loyalty performed as honor until honor cracked. Beaumont's broad shoulders dropped. He stared into the flames. Poirot stepped back, surveying the broken circle. The cast is assembled. The performances have been reviewed. Some played grief, some loyalty, some indifference, or some helpfulness. All were costumes. But one leading role was the most dangerous. The murderer who performed innocence so convincingly he almost deceived even Hercule Poirot. He paused, letting silence fill the room like a held breath. Marcus Hale, he said quietly, the spotlight falls on you. The flask, the steady hands, the arranged body, the forged note, all theatre. Ambition drove the hand that poisoned. Guilt arranged the scene. The performance is over. The curtain falls. Truth takes her final bow. The fire snapped once sharply. Rain tapped on the windows like fading applause. The grandfather clock chimed 11, slow and solemn. Poirot touched his magnificent moustache thoughtfully, then smoothed an imaginary wrinkle from his sleeve. Observe with Poirot, mon ami. You saw the tells. The dry handkerchief, the steady hands, on the averted glances. You watched how each row crumbled when the light grew too bright. Ask yourself, if you carried such guilt, how long could you hold the pose? The tension has broken. The actor stands, revealed. The little grey cells have triumphed. Order and method have stripped the stage bare. The final act concluded. Only truth survived the curtain call. Chapter 8. Curtain Call. The salon lights seemed dimmer now, as though the chandelier itself had exhausted its glow. The fire in the hearth burned low, casting long, wavering shadows across the velvet curtains and polished mahogany. Rain continued its soft, relentless tapping on the windows, a muted applause that had lost its enthusiasm. The heavy air still held traces of dying lilies, Chanel perfume gone stale, the faint bitterness of abandoned coffee, and the last ghostly wisp of Beaumont's Cuban cigar. Hercule Poirot stood quietly at the center of the room, small hands clasped behind his back, green eyes moving slowly over the broken cast. No one spoke. The grandfather clock ticked on, measuring the silence. Marcus Hale remained seated, head bowed, rough tweed jacket hanging loose on his frame. The mask of the loyal, grieving assistant had shattered completely. What remained was a young man stripped bare, shoulders slumped, hands trembling without any need to perform the tremor. When the mainland police seaplane arrived at dawn, he rose without protest. Two officers in crisp uniforms stepped aboard, their leather belts creaking softly. Hale offered no resistance as they read the charges: murder, forgery, obstruction. His voice, when he spoke, was small and ordinary. "Yeah, I thought the research was mine by right," he whispered. "I thought." He would never know. The words hung like a final, failed line. They led him away across the deck. His footsteps on the parquet sounded heavy, final. The launch carried him into the grey morning mist toward justice. Lady Victoria Thorne stood near the open door to the terrace, silk gown catching the first pale light. Her performance as grieving widow had ended. The dry handkerchief lay discarded on a side table. Genuine tears had left faint mascara tracks on her cheeks. She faced accessory charges, providing the key concealing knowledge of the plan. "I never meant for Elias to die," she said to no one in particular. "I only wanted to be free of him." Her voice cracked on the last word. She would return to London under caution, facing trial in a society that adored scandal almost as much as it condemned it. The elegant mask of devoted wife was gone. What remained was a woman who looked suddenly older, smaller, stripped of role and artifice. Professor Lydia Voss adjusted her glasses with unsteady fingers. The crisp linen blouse was rumpled now, scholarly detachment replaced by quiet regret. She had not killed, but she had known. Known of Hale's desperation, known of the forged credit, known and stayed silent. "I envied his spotlight," she admitted softly to Poirot. "I thought ruin would leave room for me." No formal charges would come for her silence, but the academic world would remember. She would publish again, perhaps more honestly. But the shadow of complicity would linger in every citation of her name. Miss Eleanor Ruiz sat apart, the velvet gloves abandoned beside her like relics of a finished performance. The hothouse rose corsage had long since been thrown overboard. Obsession had worn the costume of generous patronage. Rejection had torn it away. She had said nothing when she could have spoken, letting jealousy masquerade as indifference. No criminal charge would touch her. She had committed no act. But the weight of her silence pressed heavily. "I loved him once," she murmured. "Then I hated him. Now I feel nothing." She would return to her family's wealth, perhaps channeling it into quieter causes. But the role of carefree heiress had ended. What remained was a woman learning, slowly, to live without masks. Captain Reginald Beaumont stood last by the rail, starched uniform creased, leather boots scuffed from pacing the deck all night, and he had handed over the key, believing it harmless, believing love justified the small betrayal. When murder followed, he had protected her silence out of misplaced loyalty. Accessory after the fact. The charge was read quietly as the police prepared to depart. "I thought I was protecting her," he said to Poirot, voice rough. "Instead, I helped destroy everything." He would lose his command, his career at sea. Yet there was a strange relief in his eyes. The burden of performance lifted at last. Poirot observed them all, one by one, as the seaplane's engines started with a low roar outside. "The psychology prevails," he said softly to Hastings, who stood nearby. "Guilt strips the actor bare. When the spotlight of truth burns too brightly, no rehearsal can save the performance." And they played their roles until the curtain fell. Now only the consequences remain. The group watched in silence as Hale was escorted aboard the launch. Victoria followed soon after, head high, but eyes downcast. Voss and Ruiz would depart on the next supply flight. Beaumont would remain until formal handover of the yacht. The elegant stage, the yacht, the island, the expedition, felt hollow now. Its Art Deco glamour reduced to polished wood and empty chairs. Watch with Poirot, mon ami. You see how exposure changes everything? The masks lie discarded on the floor. No more trembling hands to fake. No more dry handkerchiefs to hide behind. Consider, what happens to the actor when the audience knows the truth? The theater is finished. No encores, no bows. The engines faded into the distance. The rain eased to a drizzle, and the fire burned down to embers. Doors closed softly as crew members moved about their duties, restoring order to the ship. No applause for this performance. Only justice. Chapter 9. After the show, the Evolution's Grace turned her elegant bow toward the open Pacific, leaving Darwin Island behind like a finished set struck after the final performance. Sunlight filtered through scattered clouds, catching on the polished mahogany railings and making the crystal chandelier in the salon sparkle once more, though the light now felt quieter, less theatrical. The air had changed. The heavy perfume of lilies had faded entirely, replaced by clean salt and the faint, fresh scent of distant rain washing the deck. Crew members moved about with soft footsteps on parquet, restoring order, stacking crystal glasses, folding velvet cushions, closing cabin doors with gentle clicks. The yacht no longer felt like a stage. It was simply a ship again, carrying its passengers home. Lady Victoria Thorne remained in her cabin for most of the voyage. The silk gowns hung untouched in the wardrobe. She wore simple linen now, no Chanel trailing behind her. When she appeared briefly on deck, her posture was straighter, not from performance, but from the strange relief of truth laid bare. She would face trial in London as an accessory. Society would whisper for years. Yet there was a subtle transformation. The mask of devoted widow had been stripped away, leaving a woman who looked at the horizon with clear, unguarded eyes. I spent years playing a role I no longer remember choosing, she told Poirot quietly one evening. Now I must learn who I am without it. Freedom, she discovered. I tasted bitter at first, but honest. Professor Lydia Voss spent the days in the library, surrounded by Thorne's abandoned notes. The crisp linen blouses gave way to softer cotton. Her glasses no longer served as armor. She began rewriting the Darwin paper, alone this time, crediting no one but the evidence itself. I thought ruin would make room for me, she admitted to Poirot over cold coffee one afternoon. Instead, it forced honesty. No criminal charges would pursue her silence, but the academic world would watch closely. She would publish again, perhaps with less brilliance, but more integrity. The role of bitter rival had dissolved. What remained was a scholar learning, slowly, to stand in her own light. Miss Elena Ruiz walked the deck each morning, velvet gloves and wilted roses long discarded. She stood at the rail for hours, watching the waves without need for dramatic effect. Obsession had worn the costume of generous heiress. Rejection had torn it away. She wrote letters, long, candid ones, to her family, confessing the depth of her feelings for Thorne and the silence that followed. I funded his dream to stay near him, she told Poirot. Now I will fund dreams that are not tied to any man. When the yacht reached port, she planned to redirect her wealth toward genuine scientific causes, quietly, without fanfare. The heiress mask had crumbled. Beneath it emerged a woman capable of real generosity, no longer performing it for approval. Captain Reginald Beaumont remained at the helm until the final handover. His starched uniform was pressed, but no longer pristine. Leather boots bore faint scuffs from restless nights pacing the bridge. Accessory charges awaited him ashore, minor perhaps, but enough to end his command of luxury vessels. Yet he carried himself differently now. I thought loyalty meant protecting her lies, he said to Poirot as they watched the horizon together. I was wrong. True loyalty would have spoken. He would seek work on merchant ships, smaller, rougher, but honest. The role of steadfast commander had been shed. What remained was a man rebuilding integrity, one voyage at a time. Hercule Poirot observed these quiet transformations from his usual deck chair, a cup of strong continental coffee warming his small hands. He touched his magnificent moustache thoughtfully, green eyes following each passenger's subtle shift. The little grey cells, having solved the crime, now watched the aftermath, the slow shedding of old roles, and the tentative steps into authenticity. He applied his director method one last time, speaking softly to Hastings beside him. They recover, yes. Postures straighten. Voices lose their rehearsed tremor. Futures are planned with new caution. But observe, the eyes still carry lessons. The performance of normalcy is tentative, fragile after such exposure. I am reminded of the cards on the table case, where survivors returned to ordinary life with forced smiles, timed laughter, carefully edited anecdotes of the past. Yet one man paused too long when asked about the night. Another's hand shook on a glass he pretended to hold steady. Psychology shows us that trauma lingers beneath recovery. Masks may be discarded, but the memory of wearing them remains. Genuine healing is slow. Performed healing is quick but shallow, and therefore these passengers will mend, but scars will mark the places where old roles once pressed hardest. Their performances are finished. Their lives, perhaps, are only beginning. You see it now, Non. The theatre rebuilds itself quietly. Ask yourself, mon ami, why do we so quickly resume roles after the curtain falls? Habit? Fear of the void without them? Or hope that new masks will fit more comfortably? The careful observer notes the change, the hesitation before a smile, the unguarded glance at the sea. This drama has ended. Truth endures. The yacht steamed steadily onward. The grandfather clock in the salon chimed noon, clear and unhurried. Doors closed softly behind passengers, retreating to their thoughts. The theatre emptied, but the lessons lingered. More Chapter 10. Poirot reviews the performance. Hercule Poirot sat comfortably in the small salon of the Orient Express as it glided smoothly through the European countryside toward Paris. The compartment was a haven of order, polished mahogany panels gleaming under soft lamplight, velvet cushions perfectly plumped, a single crystal glass of tisane steaming gently on the narrow table before him. The faint scent of herbal infusion mingled with the clean wax polish of the wood and the distant comforting aroma of strong continental coffee drifting from the dining car. Outside the window, twilight fields slipped past in orderly rows. Inside, everything was arranged with precision. Books aligned, napkin folded symmetrically. Small hands resting calmly on the crisp linen tablecloth. The grandfather clock in the corridor chimed softly, marking the hour with measured dignity. A telegram had arrived at the last station. Marcus Hale sentenced to life imprisonment, his ambition forever confined. Lady Victoria had entered a quiet plea agreement: probation, public apology, exile from fashionable circles. Professor Voss published her revised Darwin paper under sole authorship. Reviews called it honest, if less dazzling. Eleni Ruiz established a modest foundation for young biologists. No fanfare, no photographs. Captain Beaumont now commanded a small cargo vessel out of Liverpool. His letters spoke of rough seas and clear conscience. The theatre of Darwin Island had emptied. Only the lessons remained. Poirot sipped his tisane, the sweet herbal warmth spreading through him, and allowed his mind to revisit the drama. Why do people perform rather than reveal truth? And the psychology is ancient and simple. Society demands masks, masks of strength, virtue, composure, success. Naked truth invites judgment, ridicule, loss. Greed performs as scientific passion, as Hale's devotion masked theft. Love twists into obsession, as Ruiz's generosity hid desperate longing. Loyalty becomes complicity, as Beaumont's duty shielded betrayal. Hate dresses as scholarly rivalry, as Voss's envy wore intellectual disdain. Fear of exposure drives the rehearsal. The ego cannot bear to be seen as weak, flawed, ordinary. So the actor polishes every gesture, times every sigh, perfects the tremble or the tear, until the body itself rebels. Guilt always betrays the performer. The hand reaches too steadily for the poison flask. The handkerchief remains dry while grief is declared. The eyes dart when indifference is claimed. And the little grey cells understand this. Genuine emotion disrupts order. Breath catches, pulse races, fingers fumble. Performance maintains control. Truth cannot be controlled. In the Galapagos theatre, remote and raw like Darwin's own observations, human deception stood out sharply against nature's unapologetic honesty. Creatures adapt or perish without pretense. Humans, alas, prefer the costume. I am reminded of the Roger Ackroyd case, that quiet village tragedy performed with such chilling mastery. A doctor, charming, trusted, steady-handed, played benevolence for years. He rehearsed shock in mirrors, widened eyes, dropped jaw, trembling lip, timed to perfection. When the moment came, he feigned horror so convincingly that even I, Hercule Poirot, was briefly deceived. Yet one small error betrayed him, reaching for his cigarette case with unnatural steadiness. A truly shattered man fumbles, performance polishes. There, as here, psychology triumphed. The cast was gathered, roles reviewed, tells exposed, the steady hand, the rehearsed pause, the overacted sorrow. Masks fell. Truth took her bow. So it was on the yacht. Hale's steady hands arranging the body, Victoria's dry handkerchief hiding knowledge, Voss's glance confirming secret alliance, Ruiz's silence masking obsession, Beaumont's cigar trembling when loyalty cracked. Each performance fatigued under the spotlight. The soul grows weary of lies. The body, honest actor, whispers the cue. Why does truth ultimately triumph? Because deception requires constant energy, rehearsal, vigilance, memory of lines. Truth requires only existence. It waits patiently behind every curtain, patient as the sea against the rocks of Darwin Island. The psychology of revelation is merciful. When masks shatter, healing begins, slow, painful, authentic. Victoria learns freedom without performance. Voss finds integrity in solitude. Ruiz discovers generosity untied to love. Beaumont rebuilds honor on smaller decks. Even Hale, in confinement, may one day face himself without script. Society may demand roles, but the soul craves authenticity. The theatre teaches us this. Every actor eventually forgets his lines. The body forgets to tremble on cue. The eyes forget to avoid. The heart forgets to lie. Poirot set the empty Tisane cup down with precision, aligning it perfectly with the saucer. He touched his magnificent moustache thoughtfully, then smoothed an imaginary wrinkle from his sleeve. The train's rhythm was soothing, like the slow closing of a curtain after a long run. Theatrical wisdom for you, mon ami. Watch always the unguarded moment, the pause before the smile, the hand that forgets its role, the glance that lingers too long. Their truth peeps through. In every human drama, the little grey cells wait. They observe. They remember. They reveal. Until the next theatre of crime, mes amis, Poirot will be watching.